Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Integrated Innovation Network's Startup Stories. My name's Siobhan Curran. I'm the Senior Manager at I2N. It's so nice to be able to do in-person events again, and with a coffee machine as well. We're pretty pumped about that too. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today, the Awabakal and Warramai people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the audience with us today. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to just point out the beautiful mural that's been co-designed with community, with our Indigenous partners at the Wallatupa Institute at the back there, that's just been recently installed. And for those of you that haven't been here before, you might also notice this polished concrete section as well, which actually reflects the shoreline of the Hunter River pre-colonialisation. And you can see that there's some shells in the concrete as well, and that represents the middens that would have been found along the shoreline here in the Hunter River as well. So for those of you that are new to the I2N, we're an initiative of the University of Newcastle, and we sit here within the Research and Innovation Division, and our aim is to commercialise any of the IP that might come out of the university from research, but also support our students, staff and alumni who are developing out new products and ideas. So we do everything from enterprise skill development, so building out those soft skills that we know employers really love, things like teamwork, coming up with great ideas under pressure and time constraints without all of the information, being able to pitch something convincing to a group of people without having a fully polished pitch necessarily. So we do that by the way of hackathons and grand challenges. We also run a pre-accelerator program, and we have an incubator on the top floor as well. So that offers co-working with mentoring for startups too. So for those of you that haven't been in the building before, if you'd like to join us on a tour after Startup Stories, I'd be more than happy to show you through the space as well. But for those of you that are at the very start of your journey, maybe you're pre-product, pre-revenue, you can always grab a seat down here at the Innovation Common and co-work at no cost down here on the ground floor. And there's a couple of meeting rooms that you can utilise as well. But if you want more information on the I2N, you can check out our website, newcastle.edu.au/I2N. Okay, so a little outline of the format for today's event. For those of you that have joined Startup Stories, you'll be well tuned to this one. But essentially, before I introduce our speaker today, I'll just do a little intro, and then I'm going to hand it over to our speaker because it's their story to tell and I don't want to give anything away, so it's a very short intro. And then when that presentation's done, which will be about 20 minutes-ish, then we will, I'll facilitate a Q&A. You would have noted at registration, we asked if you wanted a question asked. And we make that compulsory because we find people skip over it really quickly because they're thinking, oh, I didn't know that this is going to be asked of me, but it really helps us understand the types of things people want to know about the startup journey. And so because we make it compulsory, we get a lot more people having to think about it and provide some really interesting questions. So we'll go through those in the first instance, and then if we've got time, we'll open it up to the floor. So if anyone here today wants to ask a question, they're more than welcome to. And then we'll close off at about 9 o'clock, just in time for you to grab your car before the parking police come by. So our guest this morning is Lisa Winn. She's the founder of Ihydrate, a simple, cost-effective saliva-based hydration test that replaces intrusive blood and urine testing. Lisa established Ihydrate in July 2021, just before she started participation in the Female Founders Program, which the I2N delivered in partnership with the City of Newcastle. It was an absolute delight to have Lisa part of that program, and I'm sure she might touch on a little bit about that today as well. But I'm going to hand over now to Lisa to take you through her startup story.
Great, thank you, Siobhan. Is the sound good? You can hear me? Yeah, great. Well, thank you, and I'm going to sit down because I'm not going to stand for 20 minutes while you're all sitting. And it's just wonderful to be here with the I2N community, and I'm quite new to the Newcastle entrepreneurial scene, but it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of it. This clicker's not working, so I'm going to be doing that to Rex in the corner, and he's going to be my clicker. So, and kind of this picture is sort of, I guess, a few people in the startup stories have been quite well on that journey, right? They've got revenue, they've got profits, they've got a product in market, and they're quite well down this road. I'm at the start of this road, but I sort of wanted to show this picture because also it's a little bit symbolic of who I am. I'm from not far from this place. I don't know if who's travelled to New Zealand, you might recognise the area, but that's Lake Pukaki on the way to Mount Cook in the South Island of New Zealand, which is not far from where I grew up. Oh, great, thanks. So, you know, that's really want to talk about today, my the start of that journey and kind of where I'm going. But I'll also tell you a little bit my background and where I've got to and why I've got to where I am today. But before we kick off, can just raise your hand, who's feeling a bit tired? Who's got maybe a touch of a headache? You probably need your coffee. Yeah, right. And you probably put it down to the fact that maybe you had a bit of a late night last night or a stressful week or the kids are keeping you up. But have you actually kind of considered that it actually might be the fact that you're dehydrated? The fact that even just a 2% drop in your hydration level can actually have quite an impact on your cognitive performance. So the way you're feeling right now could actually be linked to your hydration level. So that's actually, you know, not necessarily that big an issue for you and I. We can have a drink, you know, we'll recover from a bit of dehydration, no biggie. But there are many groups in the community where it actually is a much more critical issue. Obviously athletes, you know, that's an obvious example, you know, even kind of mild to moderate levels of dehydration can impact the sports performance up to about 30%, so a big impact. Or even just, you know, for us, you know, sort of a 1% drop in an athlete's performance can actually start to impact their performance. And that 1 to 2% drop is actually before you feel thirsty. So the fact that, you know, you actually might be feeling the way you're feeling right now actually could be, you know, a link to dehydration. You don't even know that you're dehydrated. You don't even feel thirsty at that stage. It's quite low levels and quite a big impact. So that's pretty obvious. But then you've got a group you probably haven't thought about too much, which are workers, particularly workers wearing heavy PPE equipment. You know, think military, think you know, heavy construction. And when you're operating heavy machinery and you're making cognitive decisions and you're dehydrated, it's an absolute recipe for disaster. In fact, actually one study, this is a local one actually, there's lots of studies like this, but one, I think it was miners in the Hunter Valley, and they actually measured their hydration level before they went on to shift. So, and almost 50%, 48% were dehydrated before they went on to their shift, which is not great when you're operating heavy machinery in a pretty risky environment. And then you get to what you call more vulnerable groups. So obviously people with illnesses, but in particular, young people, you know, children and the elderly have a big issue around hydration. With the elderly, it's a real passion point of mine, but, you know, probably the evidence is around 30%, often they measure 30% of elderly are chronically dehydrated. About 40% of those who turn up to A&E, you know, might have broken a hip or whatever, have come in chronically dehydrated. So the impact is quite severe. It's a bit of an unspoken about and undiagnosed thing with the elderly. It, you know, increased falls, you know, increases the sort of confusion and delirium. So a big impact on, you know, the illnesses like dementia by a lack of hydration. So, so you kind of go, okay, why on earth would I be interested in this as an issue? I'm not an athlete. I'm not an OH&S person. I'm not in healthcare. So to kind of explain why I'm involved and I kind of need to tell you a little bit my background. And just to give you my sort of, I've pretty much worked in corporate all my life in two different companies. One is called Unilever and the other was Coca-Cola. So I spent about 8 years with Unilever, joined them back in the early 90s when I came out of university. And I'd done a majors in marketing and honours in marketing. And with Unilever, I was there for about 9 years and I spent a lot of time commercialising products. So, you know, right from running big project teams who, you know, right from inception of an idea or an idea around a new product, right through to running that thing down the factory line, you know, I could run those teams. So I had a real passion around innovation, new ideas, and kind of seeing things come to life. So that was my Unilever background. And then my next 15 years was with Coca-Cola, and I pretty much worked in two broad areas. One was the director looking after strategic planning and innovation. So I did long-term planning, long-term innovation, mergers and acquisitions, and our partnerships. And then the other time I was the chief marketing officer. So running for Australia, New Zealand, a few other markets, but running all the brands, all the campaigns, all the new products. So in all that time, I had a real kind of bend around innovation and commercialization. But this particular area, I think, came back in sort of 2015. When I was doing my innovation role, I actually was the sort of global lead for the Coca-Cola company, setting up a startup team. So we had an internal incubator, and I recruited two guys. They didn't know each other at the time, Jason and Frankie. The pictures are up there on the screen, and created this sort of internal incubator. And we had them working across two broad areas. One of those areas was in supply chain. So Coca-Cola Amatil has a lot of trucks, a lot of warehouses, a lot of data, and they kind of created this idea, and actually with, I think, Data 61 at the time, which was, or NICTA, so the government agency, kind of the equivalent of the CSIRO, but based on data, worked with them, and they've spun out a company called Ihydrate, and you should sort of look that one up. It's New South Wales based now, but they've been really successful in creating space management and category management, sort of early stage, or quite early on, machine learning and artificial intelligence. That was one area, and they've been hugely successful. The other area that we got them working on at the time was hydration and hydration monitoring. So that was, thanks, Siobhan. So at that time, we were looking around, and this had a startup team, so Jason Frankie working with me, and I was a sponsor. But I was running a lot of these big beverage brands. And so I was really conscious that we talked a lot about hydration. We had a lot of brands like Powerade that were actually banging on about hydration. I was working with the Institute of Sport around the electrolytes, but it became really apparent that it was extremely difficult to measure hydration. That people, even at the Institute of Sport at elite level, were struggling to measure hydration in athletes and just in the general population. Great, perfect. Thanks, Siobhan. And so what you might not know is that there's actually not really any easy, effective way that's sort of low cost, portable, convenient, non-invasive to measure hydration today. So if you take it, it's kind of on a continuum. So at one end of the spectrum, you've kind of got the gold standard, which is a blood test. So you're getting really accurate, but you don't get real-time feedback. It's not really portable, it's pretty invasive. Then you've got these sort of groups in the middle, which is things like naked body mass measurement before and after, again, not very portable or convenient. Urine samples, messy, invasive, right through the other end of the scale, which are really simple techniques, but really inaccurate. So things such as doing skin pinch tests, which is still done today and with medical staff, or looking at urine colour, which is not very accurate. So at that time, this was back in 2015, we scoured the globe. We had a bit of a budget at the time, and with Jason Frankie, we actually had a number of different tests. We had sweat monitors, we had a test in San Francisco, we had another bioimpedance that we were working on, trying to crack this thing about how to measure hydration. But ultimately, we weren't successful. The science just wasn't there, and the techniques we were doing to get us to where we needed to be. And then that's when an idea came, which was actually much, much closer to home. It was actually measuring hydration through another body fluid, and that was saliva. And actually, it was a New South Wales-based team that came up with the idea. So a guy, Dr. Philip Borton from Sydney Uni, he kind of took on the challenge. So he took on the brief from Red Garage Ventures, which is the entity that we were working with at the time. And he and a bunch of students came up with some prototypes and some really interesting ideas around testing hydration through saliva. So kind of a unusual world, unusual science technology. So I'll talk a little bit about what it is, but just if you think about that time frame, so it was 2015, they did some work from 2015 to 2016, and then it sort of paused because I'd left Coke, Jason and Frank were really successful in their Ihydrate startup, and we just sort of, everything just got shelved, right? So we sort of picked it back up again. In July last year was when I went, right, I can't let go of this idea and I want to have another crack at it. So new companies formed and off we go. So we kind of knew, but with this kind of background that we've got. So what is Ihydrate? So it's a saliva-based, monitoring system, but it uses biomarkers, which is measuring properties, different properties in your saliva. I mean, saliva is a kind of a pretty busy, noisy data set. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. There's various proteins and enzymes and electrolytes and all sorts of things, but we're measuring different properties and different biomarkers, and the combination of those biomarkers we kind of call the H index, kind of our algorithm measuring those different biomarkers, which is our kind of assessment of hydration status. One back, sorry. Yeah. So you can pretty much see on that slide, that's just a rough pictures from, that's actually now out of date. There was a prototype from probably before Christmas, and already it looks a bit different, but pretty much simple as there's a test point, a lickable, you hold it to your tongue for 5 seconds, and you close it up, and you wait for 2 minutes for the test result to fall. And then with an optical reader, so, scan the QR code and with your phone, you take that test result. And just to kind of give you an idea of who's working on it at the moment, so the test point, the actual test strip itself, Phil Borton's back involved, the guy from back in 2015. But also we're using Newcastle-based talent. So 2 or 3 students from the medical engineering department at Newcastle are involved at my house. We're testing, so that's as sophisticated as it gets, mixing things up and making the test strip, and also using local Newcastle-based app developers. And Vivek in the back from Jagersoft at Warners Bay is leading the work doing the first prototype of the optical reader. And after this meeting, he's going to show me the first cut of that, so it's pretty exciting. So this is, again, and you probably just flick to the next one as well, Rich, thanks. This is tests from when we were doing the work back in 2018, and so it was really early stage then and small samples, but we were really, really excited back then around the fact that we could measure dehydration, subsequent rehydration with our meter at the time. We've got to go back in now and redo all the stuff with kind of human trials the next few months, but that was pretty exciting. So the journey is, when we launch, we're going to really focus on that athlete market first, and primarily trying to really embrace our Newcastle-based athletes to be our test dummies. The ones I've spoken to are pretty interesting characters, and really have validated the need for such a device. They really want it. And also they're quite good at, they treat the whole bodies like human laboratories. So they're really quite, seem to be quite keen to, share data, learn about their bodies, and really keen to kind of test and validate and help us. But moving on from that, obviously industry groups and the elderly. So in terms of where we're at on the journey, you can see we sort of kicked off in July, and that's been really very much focused on all that great, exciting stuff, like setting up a company and IP arrangements and tax and ABNs and all that stuff that you guys know very well. I also managed to secure a early stage grant from the New South Wales government, the MVP grant, which is a 25,000 match grant, and then was on the Female Founders Program late last year, which has been really invaluable around just getting that network of contacts, great advice, great ideas and tips on how to kick off your startup. So I highly recommend that program to any female founders, and hopefully it gets real big thumbs up from Siobhan that it happens. Moving forward, this next, right now we're very much validation phase with the optical reader and the test strip, hoping to aim later this year around sort of human test and trials. And then as we scale up, it's kind of an interesting, I really want to make sure we, we'll start off as a cottage industry. We can kind of make the strips, ideas, as I said, in my home. So that sense of actually scaling up slowly, trying to bootstrap this as much as I can, so that we can kind of scale and grow and actually get revenue in before we need to kind of invest in scaling up. There's a kind of regulatory journey as well, and I've got some quite good advice on how to get to commercialization without having to get, and then slowly build up claims and evidence base to go further along that regulatory journey. So it's kind of slowly scale is my aim. So yeah, this whole kind of Newcastle-based ecosystem. So linking with obviously things like I2N, the University of Newcastle, but even to the extent of using local people to test athletics groups and clubs. So it's kind of really want this to be ultimately a product that goes global, but really has come from kind of this Newcastle entrepreneurial kind of ecosystem. I kind of thought, oh, maybe this is always people kind of share what they've learned. I thought, oh God, I've only been doing it since July, but I've probably got my learning so far are a little bit based into my corporate background. And I need to turn around because I can't read that on there. Okay, the first one I had was kind of the learning around tenacity and persistence. I mean, this is an idea that I've had from a long time. And I always found in my corporate career that those ideas that I had that I could never let go of, and you just kept, and there's so many pushbacks and so many things, but I just kept going, were always the ones which were the most ultimately rewarding and successful. So that kind of sense of, big learning is keep going with that tenacity and persistence, and probably being a pain in the ass is probably a good thing at times. Mentors and advisors, and that's something coming from corporate to startup has been really refreshing. In corporate, particularly when you're, coming as a CM. People, they either are kind of, why are you asking me this? And they're a little bit wary, the big corporate machine, or they just see you with a great big dollar sign, that they just, nothing comes for free, right? They just see you as a big fat check. So what I've found coming into startup land, it is absolutely wonderful, this kind of virtuous circle around people giving advice. I work in volunteer work, and I'm on some, some boards, advisory boards. So I kind of give advice to others, but I get this amazing circle back from getting advice from mentors, advisors. Glenn here today has been wonderful and been invaluable help being a mentor already for me and many people in this building. So that's been great. The concept of trusting your skills. I mean, you kind of come in this journey thinking you've all got imposter syndrome in startup, but we've all come with these incredible skills that we've gained from other experiences, and just kind of that relying on those that invariably you know more than you think, right? Every time I sort of think, oh, I don't know how to do that, I realise I've actually done something pretty similar in my past, and all those skills are there. And then the last piece of the learning I had was probably scaling at your pace. And what I mean by that is I've been involved in a lot of deals, licensing agreements, sponsorship agreements, big JVs, acquired businesses, equity stakes. There's been a lot of investing, and I've been involved from the corporate side, and a lot of franchise agreements. And I know the good that comes with them, but also the bad. And there's a lot of tension in those relationships, natural tension, but it can be really hard. And that idea of, being in control of your destiny and not allowing someone to come in and so my kind of learning is scale at your pace, in the sense that, so many times you get a mismatch between investors coming in or partners of any, and they have a different prioritization, a different view on scale, pace, priorities, the conflict and the difficulties that can be caused by that. So my kind of coming out of that into my own startup is I want to control this, I want to control the pace, I want to control the direction, and I want to make sure that, that someone doesn't come in as an investor and take a control and start pushing it where I don't want to go. So that's my other learning sort of from corporate going into startup. They can be, really important to get that right. So that's it from me. I guess, we'll get to some questions now, but, love to get people involved. So if particularly people who want to be involved in testing it when we've got the prototype. So I've got a really rough, it's not very pretty, but a rough landing page, ihydrate.co. So if you jump on that, send me a note through that. And if you want to be part of testing, trialing, or any advice or networks, that would be great as well. So thank you for your time. Yeah. Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah, only because you want to put your feet up there, and people always got to put their feet up there. It's around back the wrong way.
Oh, yes. Good.
Thanks so much. Okay. Oh, good. It's working. I'm going to really put it up close. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got a phobia about putting anything close to my face because of COVID. Thanks so much, Lisa, for sharing that, those insights. And actually, what you were just touching on right at the end there relates to one of the first questions that we've got, which is by Glenn, which is, have you found there to be any advantages or disadvantages in having a senior management career previously as you've undertaken this startup journey?
I've only had, so I can't really compare the opposites. I probably have to say there's advantages, and the advantages is that a couple of things. One is that, you know, I did get exposed to had a lot of great opportunities, but I also got thrown in the deep end, and you know, so you kind of have to sink or swim. So, you know, you might be pushed down to Canberra and you've got to go and speak to some minister about an issue, or, you know, I used to get sent around the world and have to pitch to some board of directors. So I had a lot of times where I thought, can I do this? And then you find you can, right? So you put in those environments and you have to, so that gives you a lot of sort of confidence to actually go, well, I can do something different as well, you know, start up my own business. So, but the other piece that I found was really advantageous is when you're in those environments, you've got a whole lot of subject matter experts. And so you might be running a team, but you've got the CFO there and the technical guy there and the person who's regulatory expert, and you've got the lawyer there, and you sort of don't realize how much you learn from them. So you kind of learn through osmosis. And so you kind of, at least, you know, you're reading the documents, they're presenting. So you kind of know you get to know very quickly what good looks like and what best practice is, because you've got these really talented people that you're working with. And so you also learn what questions to ask and what sort of, so when you're starting to do your own business, you're kind of dabbling, and you're not an expert in any one of those things, but you kind of have to wear your regulatory hat, and you've got to wear your finance hat, and you've got to wear your marketing hat. Because you've been around that in the corporate environment, you kind of go, you sort of just keep back and go, well, what did so-and-so do? And actually, you realize you picked up more than you thought you did, basically, because you've been surrounded by these people who are really great in those particular fields. So downsides, I don't know yet the downsides are coming from corporate into startups. So ask me, Glenn, in another year's time, and I'll tell you what those downsides are. I'm sure there are many. Maybe you've already spotted some. So.
The next question is from Sanjay Gund from My File, and this is a perennial startup question. How have you financed the early stages of your business?
So I'm kind of bootstrapping, so a small amount of my money, and I've got the New South Wales MVP grant, and I'm hoping I'll need to get through a next lot of funding, sometime this year. But I'm hoping, because it's not this sort of technology, we can actually do a lot at home. You know, there's a lot of, it doesn't require massive pieces of kit right up. You can actually get quite well through, and hopefully that is scale. And so I won't need a big investment chunk early on. So mostly I'm trying to get through as much as I can, bootstrapping and building as I go.
The next question's from Blake Rutledge from Cruise Consulting, and they've asked, when pitching your idea, how did you balance the journey of growth versus profitability? And what do you find resonates more with investors at the moment? Might be a little bit early to say, but the investors you have spoken to.
Yeah, so look, I'm not pitching to investors, because I've mentioned that kind of bootstrapping type journey. But generally, I probably sat on the other side of the fence. Look, I did due diligence on a number of businesses, or looking at investing in businesses previously, and that kind of thing of growth versus profit. I think my philosophy and what we would look at is that you've got to take something right down to its smallest kind of entity and go, is there enough value in that? Is there enough in that value chain at its smallest size, so that all the pigs that want to put their nose in that trough, eventually there's enough room for them all? And so you kind of need to really understand that at gross margin level, and really go, yeah, this is actually, there's enough room for everyone, because you've got to think about customers and wholesalers and all those other, all the pigs that are going to be in there, which is not a very nice analogy, but at that point, then, if you scale, you might forego some of that profit to grow fast, but ultimately it's there. So that's what I think most investors are going to be looking at. That is there enough in that small entity? So they may say, fine, we're going to forgo that because we're going to double down to get the growth, but we know that we'll be able to extract that down the track. So you got to kind of look at both. And I don't think investors, they're going to look at it in a similar way, in my view. I think, why wouldn't you? Yeah.
So we've got some technology related questions next. This one's from Peter Morrissey at HunterNet, and he's asked, does this development use thin film transistor technology? I think you've kind of covered that in your
Yeah,
presentation.
and no, it doesn't. So thin film, I don't know a lot about it, but it's kind of like a field transistor technology. And no, it doesn't take.
So it's biomarkers.
Yes,
Yep.
sort of, biomarkers that it's sort of embedded on the test strip and then interact with your saliva and wick through sort of microfluidic paper.
So if you've done a COVID test, you'd be very familiar with that type of same process, or a rat test rather.
Yeah.
So how difficult is the process to get regulatory approval for this type of device? And this is from Cameron Moore at Tilter.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that was one of my big worries coming in, because depending on the regulatory journey, it can be hugely different in terms of time frame and cost. But I had a guy who's been an advisor who's ex-TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration. So he was sort of 15 years with them. And he's really helped me map out, which is why I felt confident I could do it, that you can, you know, it really comes down to the claims you make and the segments that you target. So I can get to market, you know, without, and then build through into TGA once we've got more evidence base. I want to make harder claims, I want to work into more, in different consumer segments and different environments. So at this stage, it's just your standard regulatory journey for any product. And then trying to build that with the end goal. I do want to get TGA. I want to have that claims base. I want to get that sort of, because that gives me more IP, more proprietary properties. So, but it's kind of stepping into that. So I have to be very, very careful going through that I don't step outside the guidelines, the guardrails that I've got to advisors helping me to do that.
Matt Barry from Actified has asked, how did you find the process of applying and gaining the New South Wales Minimum Viable Product Grant?
Yeah, that was actually really easy. So it literally was just an online process. And when I got stuck in just the boxes you filled out, and you put your pitch deck with that. So it was actually a really easy process to go through. But also I found a couple of times I got a bit stuck, you know, what were they looking for? And there was always a number to ring, and someone was really prompt giving you that personal advice about, you know, what was needed. So it was actually really straightforward. It takes a while for the payments and things to sort of come through, but because it sort of goes through that sort of government cycle. But actually the process was really good. I couldn't fault it. And
My understanding is, being a New South Wales government grant, whatever you spend the money on has to be spent with New South Wales-based businesses. Is that correct?
It encourages you to. So you can spend outside, but only, I think it's from memory, 20% of that money can be spent outside. So, but they won't, you know, they can't, it's like percentage base. So I ended up just making a decision to use all New South Wales based suppliers, ABNs basically. But yeah, they allow some small amount.
So challenge related, we've got a question here from Kate Brittell, who's asked, what have been challenges in your business journey? Maybe pick the biggest one. I don't know.
Oh, there are, yeah, I think I probably made every mistake. You know, there's always challenges, you know, there's always things that go really well and things that go wrong. And you know, careers, but actually probably one thing, the challenge I probably found, and probably why I've moved into startup, is probably a good one to reflect on. So when I was the CMO, it was a big operational role. I was living in Central Coast, commuting into Sydney. You know, I'd be doing a lot of global travel and a lot of domestic travel, 3 young kids, husband had a big job as well. And, you know, it was great, it was exciting, but man, it was tough. You know, it was really, and I had a whole bunch of stakeholders. There's always someone, I always feel like I'd open the door to another group of stakeholders. Oh my God, it's, you know, it's the, you know, the board of so-and-so, and oh, you know, it's the big customers, it's Coles and Woolies, or it's, you know, so all of these various stakeholders. And I had a career coach at the time. Someone put me on to speak to this lady, and she just looked at me and said, why are you doing what you're doing? I went, oh, I kind of said, oh, just sort of, because prove I can, isn't that what you're supposed to do? She said, well, you know, she gave us a piece of advice. I thought, oh, well, that's very valuable. She said, of course you can do anything in life, you know, absolutely anything, but just not at the same time. You actually have to time, like, just, you know, get your timing right. You know, you just focus on something, make it your priority, do it well, and get more fulfillment and enjoyment. And because I just felt I was stretched about 1,000 places. So it wasn't long after that I actually stepped down from my corporate role, and yeah, here I am. So, you know, that was good. You can do anything, but just, you know, manage timing. Get your timing right in life and things are much better.
Very wise advice. The next question we've got is from Malcolm Sheil at ANZ, who's asked, what are the most pressing needs right now and will you be hiring soon?
Pressing needs, making sure...
He might be looking for a job.
Is making sure this thing works. So validation. Because the idea is I've got to fail fast, right? If it's not going to work, I've got to learn that quickly. So, that's the 100% focus, making sure is it reliable? We know in small scales it's working, but is it reliable enough with saliva from a lot of different people and different environments, etc. Hiring soon in the small scale way, so yes, we've got some biomedical students helping out at the moment, blah, blah, blah. But the idea is hiring locally. So it's kind of a Newcastle-based sort of team. Yeah.
And the final question from the registrations, and then we'll jump to in the room. The question here is from Raymond Winn from Canberra Daily Deals, who's asking, what have been the technology challenges so far?
I think I mentioned what work we did, and we blew a bit of cash early on looking at other technologies around sweat-based and bioimpedance and things. So we kind of, that's all very well to do that when you're in corporate land, so you've got to be really careful when you're doing it yourself. But, so basically the technology challenges is to make sure that, what we've got actually is validated and works. And it's quite hard because it's new to the world science. So you're validating not just that it works, but also proving to others. Ultimately, we need to publish papers and things like that to actually prove out that kind of science base around saliva and it's linked to hydration. So yeah, there's a lot of technology challenges, including, the optical reader and the software, being able to do that in all sorts of environments, and someone's holding a test strip and poor light or upside down or, and actually trying to get that test result. So there's technology challenges everywhere, but hopefully all doable.
Have we got any questions from the audience in the room? I'll hand you the mic.
Hi. What you were saying about the science, it sounds like a pretty key component. So that collaboration that you had with Sydney Uni, did you have that relationship already, or is it something that you had to go out and seek? And if so, how did you establish that?
Yes, no, good question. So at the time, so I was kind of sponsoring that group, and we had Jason Frankie were kind of the co-founders working on that, and they almost had it was almost a pitch. They actually put out a brief, and it went to kind of basically scientists from around the world could look at that brief and actually try to respond to it, which is where we got some ideas. So, so Sydney Uni, one of the groups that kind of came in and went, hey, actually, we're going to work on this and collaborate with you. So, but I think a lot of the universities do have, and I think it's evolved a lot more even since then, where there's so much more openness between commercial entities and universities to work on things together. And, so they just literally went through that kind of process of pitching it out. But I think I don't know in Newcastle, someone else might better answer that. I've kind of, for example, being involved here, I literally just LinkedIn search, we found James Welsh from the Department of Engineering and just said, hey, can I meet? We've got this idea and looking for people to work. And he sort of said, we've got work experience students, and matched me up, and he's now opening other doors at the university and other people, potential collaborators within the Newcastle sphere. So it's actually, yeah, really quite, in terms of just pick up the phone or send a message, and it's surprising those connections, how quickly they can be made.
Just to follow up on that too, the University of Newcastle has the Office of Knowledge Exchange and Enterprise, and actually we have one of our business development managers here today who specialises in medicine and health. Monique Moore. And so we have business development managers within that office that are there to help assist industry who are looking for, advice around contract research or collaborative research, or just pick the brains, have a cup of coffee with a researcher like James Welsh to kind of understand what their areas of strength are, and if they might be able to help or point you in the direction of work integrated learning students like you've been able to take advantage of. At the end of the day, there is no one front door to the university. Key or Knowledge Exchange and Enterprise is one of them. And of course, any one of our academics at the university is the front door as well. So it's really just doing what Lisa did and just taking advantage of any networking opportunities and using LinkedIn and reaching out and seeing what you can get. Yeah. Any other questions? We might just take one more before we wrap up for the day. Richard.
It's been so good to see this wrapped up in such a neat package, your whole story, instead of seeing it sort of piecemeal over the last few months. But I was wondering, what was it like to wrangle the IP from the larger corporate, and how did you manage those relationships and those talks in the very beginning when you realized you wanted to take this further?
Things can take quite a long time in corporate land, and so just kind of, you know, tenacity in terms of actually it just took some time, you know. It just took time to obviously Red Garage Ventures was its own entity, and we just kind of had to just disentangle some of those sort of agreements and things. But you know, and all parties all really had, you know, great intent and really supportive, but it's just kind of a bit of a slow process. It's not someone's highest priority to kind of sort out all of those things, right? But it clearly got me on the side going, hey, I'm really quite keen to continue with that. And they're like, yeah, but it's not really someone's highest priority. So just, yeah, it all worked out, but it was just, you know, it took its time just to kind of unravel that and sort of those things out.
And I think just on that note too, anything related to IP and commercialization negotiations at universities or corporates is always a long time. So it's not a transaction like buying a cup of coffee. It can take a really long time. So persistence pays off, that's for sure. Yeah. I think we need to wrap up, so anyone who needs to get back to their car at 9 o'clock can. So I'm going to ask if we can just give a round of applause to Lisa for sharing her story today. So much, Lisa. And if this has piqued your interest in medtech and health tech generally speaking, our next event that we've got coming up is Join the Dots on the 31st of March down here in the event space here at Q Building. It's a fantastic networking event that we put on super cash. We have 4 to 5 people that we invite that are from that sector, whether they're students, alumni, startup founders, corporates working in the medtech and health tech sector, and we invite them to come in and just talk for 2 minutes, and we time them. I actually have to clap them off the stage, where we just ask them without a deck who they are, what they're working on, and what they need help with. And it just means everyone in the room knows 4 or 5 people that they didn't know before. So it's interesting way they meet new people in the sector that you might not have known before. And not everyone who comes every month is always within the discipline or the area industry focus that we have. It's innovators across the whole entire spectrum. So it's just a really great way to meet people. It's so exciting. We can actually do events face to face. So encourage you to come along, grab a drink and start a conversation. And you never know, you might meet the next R&D collaborator or co-founder or whatever it might be that you're looking for. So that's it from us here at the I2N. Thanks again so much for joining us here today. Feel free to stick around. Richard will be able to take anyone up on a tour who wants to check out the incubator space afterwards as well. And have a great week.